All I could taste was blood and metal.
So today I want to talk about torture porn. When did gore branch off into torture porn? I don't know when, I don't know why.
Oh, I do. It's 2003 or 1999. It kind of depends on your perspective. So first off, trying to define torture porn is pretty tricky, and it just encourages deconstructionists, and we don't want them encouraged. We want them disencouraged and possibly disemboweled. I propose that for brevity and sanity we just skip that and take the line on torture porn that we would take on regular porn. I know it when I see it. We could try and be more precise, but I would prefer to skip the quibbling because it's the whys and whens of torture porn that are much more fascinating and worth you understanding. I want to talk with you about the torture porn subgenre because it is routinely and unfairly maligned, misrepresented and slandered. Some of the biggest names in film criticism unfairly attack the torture porn subgenre, and you're going to learn that studio failure and snobbery have a lot to do with it.
And it is, in the end, a let's see how much torture you can endure movie with no substance whatsoever. It's a popcorn and vomit film, and that's perfectly fine.
Oh yeah, snobbery. Now, even the name torture porn is a problem. I wish there were a non-derogatory term for it. Let's go with calling the genre modern torture. And I'm now wondering whether YouTube's algorithm is going to be harsher on the word torture or porn. But they let WAP trend, so I think we know, right? Now, there has been torture in films forever, of course there has, but it's usually been a specific section of the film rather than, say, a main feature or a defining characteristic. So when we are saying torture porn or modern torture, we are, of course, talking about the sort of 2003 era films that began with Saw and Hostel. And the question you have to ask is, why 2003? Well, we have to go back to this.
Hi. Did you ever play Deathquake?
Okay. But you have to wear rubber.
No, we're going to have to go a little further back.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Oh, come on, you know I don't watch that shit.
Why not? Too scared?
No, it's just what's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
No, we're going to have to stop stealing ideas from Fight Club.
Eeny, meeny, miny.
Yo, man, it's cool. It's cool, man. It's cool.
Yeah, okay, here we are. I was originally going to make a separate video about why Scream could only have been made in 1996 and not earlier, but that is part of the whole story of why modern torture started in 2003, so I figure let's just go with the whole story. So first off, horror films are famously cheap to make, and that allows them to be incredibly profitable when they're popular. And if they flop, well, you know, you've not invested much in them. For that reason, they appeal very much to audiences and to studios. Horror films are regularly the most profitable films of the year. That high profitability is incredibly attractive to studios, and so that success brings a huge number of sequels. The mass production of sequels has an inevitable result because the increase in quantity, especially rapid increase in quantity, naturally and inevitably reduces the quality of the product. Dedicated horror fans are well aware of this. Now, it seems very well known that the peak of low-quality horror sequels is around the early 90s. I mean, that is when the pop culture starts referring to this openly.
It's a new batch of movies! Yo, the new Friday the 13th movie. Friday the 13th part 1649.
So understandably, it's in the mid-90s that you see the earliest and most significant reaction to this. Most notably, Wes Craven making 2 films in a row that address this decline in the quality of the horror genre.
But the problem comes when the story dies. And that can happen in a lot of ways. It can get too familiar to people, or somebody waters it down to make it an easier sell, you know? Or maybe it's just so upsetting to society that it's banned outright.
That is 2 films in a row from the biggest name in horror at the time. Wes Craven's New Nightmare is fascinating and worth looking at in depth on its own. So let's just talk about Scream. Scream's focus was calling out laziness and predictability in the horror genre and showing us that the slasher films could be genuinely good, fresh, and impactful. Was a lesson of Scream learned? No, it really wasn't. It seemed like studios decided that what they needed to do to be successful was just put in some fourth wall breaking humour that points out how crap the movie is. That wasn't the lesson, guys. That was not what you were meant to do. It's kind of the easy way out, isn't it? Weak and pathetic. And the result of that, I feel, is that from the mid-90s onwards, in contrast to the 80s, you don't have like a canon of horror. You have an absence of canon. It's hard to say which of the 90s films are essential because they're all over the place in different mini franchises. It's not dominated by a few big ones. It's like instead of shaping up and improving, horror just decided to make a joke out of itself and just say, yeah, I know I'm low quality. Aren't I rubbish? It's a very Gen X response. It's in a kind of lazy defense hiding behind irony, horror just went up its own arse. So in the wake of the failure to reform following Scream, in the early 2000s, you get something new, something very, very different.
What it will do is it will bore them, because it is simply a series of torture set pieces strung together by a ridiculous flashback, flash forward, nonsensical garbage narrative, which unfortunately has pretensions towards philosophical profundity occasionally sewn in order to justify the killing and the violence, all the rest of it.
It's something people hadn't seen before, something with a very new focus. These were films that had a very new focus, and the sort of quick, forgettable stabbings of the slasher genre, they're gone. Instead, you're taking more time with the characters, you're in more elaborate scenarios, and you're building up dread. And yeah, these characters still die, and they die horribly. But it was new and it was visceral. It was very different to forgettable stabbings. It's something wrapped up in puzzles and in traps. When you're looking at these scenarios, it makes you think, how would I get out of this? What would I do if this were me? I mean, could I escape that trap? Part of Saw's brilliance is all the effort that went into it. Saw was filled with puzzles, with mysteries, and with twists, and these hit you hard. The ending of Saw is incredible even today. Heck, even Mark Kermode, who I've been ragging on here, he speaks fondly of Saw. Now, I do want to note that I don't want to defend extreme viscerality for its own sake. I do believe you can be gratuitous and unnecessary and make your film kind of ineffective. But I do think that extremity that is effective is warranted. It can be justified. And I would also try and add a bit more context to it, because in the case of modern torture films, this extreme viscerality, I feel, is a reaction to the kind of low effort killings that were in slashers, these sort of quick knifings, very swift axes to the heads. They were very rote, and this sort of new viscerality and focus on gore and, taking your time with it, that feels like a reaction to something that had become really boring and basically made you not care about the killings as much. I don't want to just write off the modern torture films, because I feel like they're an understandable reaction to post-Scream slashers that failed to learn the lessons, that are just bland, repetitive, that are even just remakes of classics that are trying to trade on name brand recognition. I mean, I think you can fairly say that the wave of J-horror and later K-horror remakes for Western audiences are basically doing the same thing. It's sort of recognising that the things put out by studios were really not up to scratch, and therefore we needed to go somewhere else, needed to do something very different and shake it up. Modern torture is just one of those approaches, but is the one that gets attacked by critics. And so in the mid-2000s, we get Saw, we get Hostel, Vacancy, Captivity, The Devil's Rejects, Martyrs, all the good stuff.
It's not scary, it's gross. I hate all that torture porn shit.
How do you really feel? Well, I like Jigsaw. I think he kills people very creatively.
But you don't give a shit who dies because there's no character development. There's just body parts ripping and blood spewing.
But the critical response was not kind. Imagine horror being hard to watch. Big thing.
Hey, what's up? You're hot. I want to kill you.
We're going to look at this critical horror snobbery against the modern torture subgenre, and Mark Kermode is the prime example of this.
In the end, a let's see how much torture you can endure movie with no substance whatsoever. It's a popcorn and vomit film, and that's perfectly fine.
I mean, just imagine saying that Hostel has nothing to say. The absolute state of this. I remember even back then in the early 2000s, people were pointing out all the social commentary in Hostel. How Eli Roth showed a naive American worldview that was easily exploited, how it was talking about commercialization, about American interventionism, about the grim rationalism of how many deaths are acceptable, how ideas of American exceptionalism and the Team America attitude gives you needless death and suffering in the harsh reality of rougher countries. Now, add to that the horror literacy, the brilliant Hitchcock tribute, and the Takeshi Miike cameo, and you have got yourself a fantastic horror. Now, Mark Kermode gives an even shorter shrift to Hostel 2, which effectively reruns the Hostel scenario with a main cast of female characters. And he just writes off completely that it has, say, anything to say about Abu Ghraib, which was a major story at the time of it being produced. As if that were a completely ridiculous suggestion. I mean, yeah, horror films never have any social commentary in them, no, how silly. And bizarrely for current times, he attacks the idea that gender swapping the main characters is a worthwhile experiment.
This infantile piffle. There are several things that are wrong with Hostel. The first is that it exists at all. I mean, Hostel in itself was a self-contained, post-saw gag, fine, thank you very much, leave, move on. But no, the idea of Hostel 2 is completely cynical. The twist this time is that the three people are, he sends on three girls, okay? And he says, oh, well, this makes me, obviously, this is so much more interesting, not three boys, this time three girls.
Ooh, pretty reactionary there. Now, I do like Mark Kermode, particularly his book, The Good, the Bad and the Multiplex. So let's give him another chance. Let's see what he has to say about another film. How about the latest Charlie's Angels remake?
Directed by Elizabeth Banks, who is, a real force for change in a male-dominated Hollywood industry. It's frothy and it makes no sense, but it doesn't matter because I really, really enjoyed it. And the reason I enjoyed it is twofold. Firstly, it does a proper update. Bosley is now a code name given to a rank within the Angels organisation. Okay, nice. So in this particular version, Elizabeth Banks is Bosley. Okay. So it is the name that is used, which I think is that's rather well done.
Huh. So gender swapping some characters for a woke remake was fun and cool, but it was completely pointless when Hostel 2 did it. That's interesting. And an explicitly feminist Charlie's Angels remake didn't get accusations of shallowness the way Hostel 2 did. That's interesting. Let's hear some more.
But what Elizabeth Banks manages to do with it is these kind of nice, neat, not too clumsy subversions. So all the way through the story, our heroines use the traits of sort of dumb male chauvinism to their advantage. There's a lot of stuff about the fact that it takes a man a certain amount of time longer to suspect that a woman is a spy because he is just assuming that she's somehow lesser than him.
The thinks start coming and they don't stop coming. You see, it's completely unfair to accuse the gender flipping of Hostel 2 of shallowness, because it's not just a straight up gender flip. It completely reimagines Hostel given the nature of the gender dynamics at play. It shows how Hostel would be completely different if it were involving women. They wouldn't fall for the traps that the men fall for, and they're looking out for different dangers along the way, and it's talking about some of the very real difficulties you have travelling as a woman. They don't approach the situation in the same way, they're not as cavalier, they're a lot more mutually supportive, and they're looking out for additional dangers along the way. I think it was a genuinely good decision by Eli Roth that freshened up the film and showed a completely new perspective, and it makes Hostel 2 a genuinely good feminist horror movie that can be enjoyed by anyone, even if they, don't go along with that ideology. You don't need to agree with everything that's in the film, but you can't say that it had nothing to say, even without the Abu Ghraib angle. Hostel 2 has a lot to say. And outside of the Hostel franchise, 6 films in the Saw series went out of its way to sort of raise issues of inequality in the American healthcare system. It's not nothing. That is not meaningless, and it is a major lie and failing of film critics when they say that modern torture films lack substance. But hands down, the biggest mistake that critics of the genre make is when they say this.
Now, the thing about the horror genre is, the horror genre can do things like it can exploit really complicated fears, like fears of identity, fears about the loss of identity, fears about existential angst, fears about life, death, the universe, God, all the rest of it. What this does is it exploits the fear of having your toe lopped off with a bolt cutter, or somebody attacking you with a blowtorch.
Galaxy brain take there. Maybe Halloween is just the fear of the kitchen knife and The Exorcist is pushing pea soup phobia. Weak. I'm going to soapbox here. Bear with me. Slashers largely are the horror of the loss of safety and modernity in our communities. It's about unsafe communities and distrust. Modern torture is different. It is a very different dynamic. It is about the brutal loss of humanity and civilization. It carries on current fears of the collapse of society and community. You, just being comfy and civilized now, can lose it all, and you can be strapped down in the chair. It's the fear that society is an illusion, that it won't protect us. You can have a United Nations guarantee of human rights and your charity wristband, but it's not going to stop barbarity coming to you. Words on paper will not protect you. When you're strapped down and the pliers are coming out, you can't just scream about your human rights. You can end up in the chair and all those statutes, charters and conventions, they won't stop the bolt cutter. You got a Waitrose in your town, but don't kid yourself about how safe you are. The horror of modern torture is the horror of the illusion of safety that modern society provides being stripped away and a savage reality being revealed. It's about realpolitik, about being powerless in a way we can't imagine, about everything being brought down to raw power. The horror of modern torture is you screaming, "You can't do this to me, I have rights," at someone who just doesn't care. Now, I'm not saying it's all gold. Of course, a lot of lazy people hop on the train and make trash. But in the best of this subgenre, the deaths actually matter more. More time is taken, there's more creativity. You dread it more in the way you don't with a slasher. The reverse bear trap in Saw sticks with you the way stabbing number 792 doesn't. These films aren't perfect, and I can criticise them from a storytelling point of view. The thing is, innovation is always very swiftly copied in weaker form. But the critique of torture porn is riddled with snobbery and a refusal to actually consider them properly. There is way too much sloppy thinking in writing off modern torture. Like Scream, modern torture, or torture porn if you want to keep calling it that, it is a response to a failure in the broader horror genre, and it has a heck of a lot to say. So does my cat. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope I convinced you, and I would really like to hear your thoughts on what I had to say below. Of course, if you liked it, give me a like, and if you are not subscribed already, please do subscribe. I'm a tiny channel, and every new subscriber is an absolute delight. Because I am working on a Christmas special, I am not going to say that is all for me this week, but I am going to say I hope you enjoyed it. All the best. Thanks, y'all. Cheers. Oh yeah, snobbery.